This self-study piece is on communications and interpersonal skills. From my observations, communications can have a huge impact on negotiations, and it certainly was an area where I had to do a lot of improvement myself when I first started bargaining. But learning how to communicate more effectively and how to manage myself and others really made me much more successful at the table. Initially, I tended to take things personally and I got frustrated with the process. But once I learned to step away from the personal aspect and look at the issues, especially looking at them from a union perspective, it really helped me to become a more successful negotiator. So we're going to first of all look at communications and interpersonal skills, and then we're going to talk about some basic negotiation processes. The learning outcome from this is critical, and it's just not important in terms of negotiating at the bargaining table, but being able to exhibit professional attitudes and behaviors is so important in this role of a human resources practitioner. And so, we'll talk about things like using active listening skills, about developing interpersonal skills, and writing effectively and speaking effectively and listening carefully. But being able to do those things are critical, and you need to be able to do them at the negotiation table. You'll be using these skills to negotiate amendments to the existing collective agreement. So let's look at those communication and interpersonal skills. Miscommunication. It happens all the time. And sometimes it might be innocent, and other times it has some pretty dire impacts. So what are some of the strategies you should be using at the negotiation table when you're not sure that you've understood what the other side has said? So some simple strategies: paraphrasing back to them what you think you heard them say to make sure that you understood, or just ask them questions to get clarification to make sure that you understand what their ideas really are. Sometimes it's just how we say things that changes the entire meaning. So while Dad was eating the dog, the cat and the horse tried to steal his meal. Doesn't sound real good. As opposed to while Dad was eating, the dog, the cat, and the horse tried to steal his meal. And we've all heard the next two. Eats, shoots, and leaves sounds a lot more like a panda than eats, shoots, and leaves. Nonverbal communications are really important at the table, and you may want to take some notes while you're at the bargaining table for your reflective paper about some of the things you saw people doing either with their face or their hands or whatever that was sending messages. Now, nonverbal communication isn't rule-bound the way verbal communication is, and so it's much easier to misinterpret what people are thinking. And one of the challenges for you is that nonverbal communication tends to be automatic, and you're not aware that you're doing it. And lastly, it is culturally defined. So, some gestures that in North America make a lot of sense mean something very different depending upon the culture of people listening or watching. So think about your nonverbal communications carefully. Listen and learn. And so the whole idea is we were born with one mouth and two ears. So we can listen twice as much as we speak, but I wonder how many of us actually do. If we ask questions and listen carefully, we'll start to uncover what's hidden in the message. We'll start to find out about some of the positions that the other side are trying to hide from us. So we want to speak in such a manner to elicit more information or to build trust. So why don't we listen and learn? Well, because most people think between 450 and 500 words per minute, yet we only talk at about 150. So there's lots of time in between for us to be jumping to conclusions, planning a reply, checking our phones, whatever it is that we're doing that we think is multitasking that actually interferes with us understanding the message. Framing is a wonderful strategy to use. So we want to influence the other person's perception by narrowing the way in which an item or an idea can be characterized. So here's a couple of examples.
Again, this is the USS Montana requesting that you immediately divert your course 15 degrees to the north to avoid a collision. Over.
Please divert your course 15 degrees to the south to avoid collision.
This is Captain Hancock. You will divert your course. Over.
Negative, Captain. I'm not moving anything. Change your course. Over.
Sir, this is the USS Montana, the second largest vessel in the North Atlantic Fleet. You will change course 15 degrees north, or I will be forced to take measures to ensure the safety of this ship. Over.
This is a lighthouse, mate. To your call. Hello, Captain. I think he's gone. Fair enough.
Another strategy you can try and use is called reframing. So now you're trying to restate another person's statement in order to make it sound less provocative and more productive. My personal favorite, perceptions. So when you're at the negotiation table, often you're involved in altering perceptions. Yours, your team's, and the other team's. So a deal is only going to take place when the offer on the table is perceived to leave everyone better off than no deal at all. And remember, we've looked at this cartoon before with the devil and the angel, and you just can't assume the other guy's the devil. Processes, strategies, and more. Knowing what to say during negotiations is critical. A well-timed statement can really turn things around. But picking the right words at the right time is a skill that you take time to learn, and not something we're going to be having a lot of time to practice in class. So what I've done is I've provided you with an aid. It's on Slate. It's called Cat's Got Your Tongue. And I love it because, first of all, it was developed by students who were taking a course in negotiations in a university in Hawaii. And what they did was they identified different typical situations that happened during the negotiations, and then they came up with some phrases that you could use in order to achieve certain things. So for example, if you're wanting the other side to put a concession on the table, there's some good words or phrases that you can use to encourage them to do it. So what you need to do is get this document off of Slate, go through it, pick phrases that sound like you. There's usually about 10 to 12 phrases that are for each situation, and some of them I look at them and I go, I would never say that, and others I go, yeah, I can see myself saying it. So highlight the ones you can see yourself saying. Practice them so that you're ready to say them. Bring the sheet to the table so you've got a cheat sheet to work with. But these are just some little phrases that will get you over some of the humps in the negotiation process. The development of your opening demand is very strategic. You'll never get more than what you initially asked for. So you need to think very carefully about what the demands will be. Here's some ideas for you to think through. If I'm the union and I'm looking for improvements, if I don't ask for something, I'm not going to get it. And the higher I start, the higher I'm likely to end up. On the other hand, if I get too extreme, I can make the other side very angry, and they might walk away, even though in reality there was lots of room for us to reach an agreement. So think really carefully about that opening demand. You want to go high, but not so high that people get upset and frustrated with what you're doing. There's really interesting research about this whole idea of giving and returning favors. So people feel an obligation to return favors, and so they're going to respond more positively if you're able to give them something early in the negotiations. So you might want to look for a non-costly concession that you could make so that the other side feels that obligation to reciprocate and to give a concession later on. And if they're not feeling like giving it to you, you can always point out the fact that you gave them something before and you're looking for them now to show greater flexibility than what they're showing. Now, concessions. That's that give and take thing. So we're making concessions. We're saying where we're willing to change our position. And they really send a lot of messages about what your needs are and what your reservations are. So before you make a move, think really strategically. In giving your concession, what is it that you want to communicate to the other side? Use the concession to shape that message, and make sure that you signal that you're getting close to your bottom line in making these concessions. Let them know where you are. When you're the lead negotiator, the most important thing for you to remember is you're not alone. That you have an entire team that, remember, you educated them back in Part D about your article. So if you want to call a caucus to review what's going to rethink, to plan on how to move forward, make sure you do. Either team can call for a caucus. Some of the rules around caucuses for the simulation is try and set a time limit for the caucuses. So if you think you're going to be 10 minutes, tell the other side. Whoever calls the caucus leaves the room. And when you come back to the room, make sure that the other team is ready for you, because while you've been away, they've been strategizing as well. So you can't just barge right in assuming that they're ready to talk to you. So you're at the negotiation table. You and the union are having problems reaching an agreement on some critical articles, and you're sitting there going, if we make concessions at this point, we're going to be signing a collective agreement we really can't afford. So what is your best alternative to a negotiated agreement? Is it letting the union go on a strike? Is it locking them out? You want to create some kind of economic pain for them? Or are you going to take some concessions on this article in order to get gains on another one? You need to think about these things before you get to the table, so you have some strategies on how you can deal with those tough negotiations. So here's some final thoughts on how to manage yourself more effectively at the negotiation table. You'll notice that I've highlighted some of the ideas, and I picked them based on my observations from other students in negotiation simulations and some of the areas where they struggled. So let's take a look at some of these. The first thing I noticed was that students didn't seem to ask a lot of questions. I think it was because they were nervous. They tended just to talk about their research, but they weren't listening necessarily to the other side, and definitely not asking questions. So make that a point to push yourself on. The second thing I noticed a lot was students getting emotionally involved, not separating the people from the problem. And so they got very frustrated with the other side as opposed to focusing on the issues. So my advice is be soft on the people, so be respectful of each other, but be hard on the issues. I noticed students grabbing offers really quickly and not using the caucus or any other strategies. Just the minute they heard something that sounded reasonable, they grabbed it. And that might have been okay for their article, but it started to set some distrust between the parties, and it had a negative impact later on. So if you get an offer that looks good, don't just jump on it and smile like the Cheshire Cat. Take your time. Make it look as if you've worked hard to reach a reasonable settlement. And then ask lots and lots of questions. When students have made concessions, so now they're moving positions, or they're putting out their offers, sometimes they got into what I call horse trading. And horse trading just meant they were just throwing numbers around without any discussion about the justification or reason. And that doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense. You're agreeing to things just because you want to just get the experience over with, rather than you're trying to get the best possible language in your collective agreement. So once again, if you ask questions, you'll end up with a better deal. Just more about asking questions. Do you get the theme? Again, not taking it personally. Take some time, and when there are issues, see if you can frame them as gains for the other side. Don't be afraid of silence. If you don't like what the other person is suggesting or saying, rather than jumping at them and getting assertive about it, use silence and see if you can get them to break first. And that's a strategy that will help you to keep that emotional temper low. So have a look over those again and see if there's some more from you. All of the material here came from these different sources. So feel free to use this to help you prepare for your simulation.